In Kentucky's isolated mountains, where the wilderness route forged its perilous course towards the western. On the frontier, there used to be an inn that travelers mentioned in low, respectful voices. They claimed that Millbrook Inn provided a warmth that was far above and beyond what any other facility could offer. Delicious meals and tidy beds. This mountain sanctuary was run by 4 tired sisters. Men would show up as strangers but depart with the impression that they had found something valuable, something that was worth the dangerous return trip. 3 states were affected by the Cunningham sisters' reputation. In order to stay at Millbrook Inn for a few more nights, merchants would postpone their business visits. The cattlemen would take risky detours over treacherous mountain passes instead of passing up the chance to see the sisters' renowned friendliness. Additionally, guests described amenities that lonely travelers hardly ever experience. Located. Adult males would cry when they received such close and personal attention. It was time to go. However, a change occurred in the winter of 1851. Passengers started bringing unsettling stories to communities around Kentucky. The road. They asserted that the road to Millbrook Inn was now dotted with deserted wagons and untrained horses. Before a pattern became apparent that could no longer be ignored, local authorities disregarded these stories as frontier hysteria. Disregarded. The last place anyone could recall seeing the dozens of guys who had disappeared was on the Cunningham sisters' welcoming door was reached by a meandering mountain trail. Prior to moving on to the tale of, I need you to help me figure out what actually transpired in those remote Kentucky mountains. Click subscribe. Press the button to activate the notification bell. Such stories are not to be missed. And let me know in the remarks what. From which state are you listening? I enjoy interacting with folks across who are as fascinated as I am with the hidden truths of America. What the authorities were going to find would show that the hospitality offered by Millbrook Inn had a far more horrifying cost than anyone could imagine. Have envisioned. In 1831, Jeremiah Cunningham passed away from consumption, leaving behind 4 children, ages 16 to 26, and a prosperous mountain estate. Situated in. The Cunningham property is located in the isolated highlands between the Kentucky frontier and Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. Spanning 800 acres of lush alpine terrain, including grain and animals, fields, and above all, a well-located hotel that catered to travelers traveling west across the wilderness road. At 26, Margaret was the oldest and had the keen intellect of a born businesswoman and the ruthless, cunning personality that would ultimately prove to be so lethal. The 24-year-old Catherine had inherited their mother's flawless appearance and an almost extraordinary capacity to elevate any man to the position of most important person in the entire world. 22-year-old Sarah imparted her late mother's expertise on mountain herbs and their different attributes. Information that turned out to be far darker than anyone had anticipated. Additionally, Elizabeth, the 16-year-old youngest had a pure charm that could disarm even the most suspicious traveler. Their grandfather had constructed the Cunningham home in 1798, when the wilderness. The road was merely a perilous path dug through harsh terrain. It has developed into one of the most reputable resting places by 1831 for traders, colonists, and explorers making their way to the bluegrass land of Kentucky. The primary residence, a large, 2-story timber building with stone foundations stood out on a ridge that looks down on the valley. The inside section included 6 cozy guest rooms, a kitchen, and a spacious communal area with enormous stone fireplaces. Enough to feed many. The Cunningham location was unique for reasons other than its location or facilities. It was the reputation for being hospitable, which had been meticulously built over 30 years. In cities hundreds of miles distant, visitors would talk about how welcoming Cunningham was, how good their After weeks on hazardous roads, the comfort of clean bedding and mountain whiskey was welcome. Jeremiah had constructed more valuable than gold. Have faith that the property has a small but devoted staff. Ezra. Since the beginning of the inn, Hawthorne, a seasoned mountain man in his 50s, had served as foreman. His familiarity with his devotion to the Cunningham family was unwavering, and his knowledge of mountains was extensive. 2 immigrants from Germany, 3 years prior, the Zimmer brothers, Klaus and Heinrich, had come in search of employment. And in the New World, stability. They occupied a hut close to the eastern edge of the land and oversaw the Germanic efficiency in cattle and agricultural activities. The fall of what locals would subsequently recall as the inn's golden age began in 1831. Omen. In the following 3 days, Kellerman had never experienced an inn like the one he had at the hands of the sisters. Sarah's food were delicacies of restaurant caliber that included freshly baked bread, expertly seasoned game, as well as her well-known honey pastries. Margaret talked to him for a long time about politics and economics, which made him sense of intellectual worth. He felt important and cosmopolitan when Elizabeth laughed innocently at his anecdotes. However, it was Catherine who gave Kellerman what he really wanted, the appearance of romance. After everyone else had gone to bed on his second night, Catherine discovered Kellerman sitting by the fire by himself, gazing into the flames with the expressionless face of a man who has lost all that was important to him. She came over with 2 warming glasses of Sarah's unique spiced rum, flawlessly in firelight-catching crystal tumblers. Her words, "You seem troubled, Mr. Kellerman," flowing gracefully into the chair next to him. A burden can occasionally be lessened by sharing it. For the following 2. Kellerman spent hours opening up to this stunning woman, who listened with such sincerity. Pay attention. He talked about his late wife, Mary, their unsuccessful attempts to conceive, and how he would go back every night to a vacant house that still had a hint of her lavender soap scent. Catherine listened sympathetically. Occasionally, with seeming tenderness, he would lean closer or stroke his hand. "It's awful to be alone," she stated. The fire burned lower, quietly. However, it need not be irreversible. What? Nothing official ever documented what transpired thereafter. However, Kellerman's actions the next morning revealed its personal narrative. He ate his meal with the contented look of a man who has found his purpose again. Despite his initial eagerness to get to Kentucky, he decided to spend an extra 2 days. Most revealingly, he started arranging to stay at Millbrook Inn again on his way back to Richmond. "I've never encountered such hospitality as he got ready to go," he said to Margaret, "this here, you and your sisters have produced something genuinely unique. I'll be telling every traveler I see about this place." Margaret grinned and took his kind payment. Almost double the usual rate, crammed into her hands with sincere appreciation. "We eagerly await your next visit, Mr. Kellerman. Have a safe trip." Thomas Kellerman, however, would never finish his travel to Kentucky. 3 days later, his horse was discovered wandering aimlessly close to Cumberland Gap. Simply put, Kellerman had disappeared, leaving only queries and an enigma that would never be formally looked into. The premise is reasonable enough for the risky aspect of the frontier was that he had been a victim of either wild animals or robbers. The reality was only known by the Cunningham sisters. Half a mile from the inn, in the woods, Heinrich Zimmer had been waiting. As soon as Kellerman left that morning, the German immigrant had the kind of peaceful temperament and was skilled with handicrafts. Efficiency that rendered him useful for jobs requiring discernment. Kellerman did not witness the final blow. His life, struck to the base of his head with a blacksmith's hammer. He was buried with his body wrapped in canvas. A designated spot deep within the mountain forest, while his large bag of gold coins made its way back to the Millbrook Inn. The four sisters gathered around their kitchen table that evening, calculating Kellerman's funds and making plans for the future. The calculations had been done by Margaret. The sum that they'd just obtained for a whole year surpassed the inn's actual profits. Catherine had demonstrated the startling ease with which lonely men could be controlled. Sarah had proven that evidence traces may be eradicated with the correct mountain craft and chemistry expertise. Elizabeth had also demonstrated that even those who appear to be the most innocent may harbor horrible secrets. "He won't be missed for weeks," Margaret remarked, carefully arranging the gold pieces. "No relatives, no good pals, going somewhere by himself where no one knows him." "Excellent." "It was nearly too simple," Catherine continued, still sporting the kind look she'd worn when consoling their victim. "He would have granted our requests." For that chilly November evening, they had learnt something far more valuable than gold. They had figured out how to make people vanish. The sisters had time to polish over the winter of 1832. Their method and created the procedures that would benefit them for almost 20 years. Margaret, along with her having a sharp business sense, they created a method for determining optimal targets. The ideal victim was a man who was traveling alone, carrying a lot of cash, had no set familial ties, and a timetable that, should he fail to reach his destination, would cause an instant alarm. Sarah's responsibilities shifted from cooking to management of the home. Her understanding of mountain plants grew to encompass an in-depth analysis of poisons and their consequences. When prepared correctly, pokeweed berries may cause cholera-like symptoms. The fox glove could result in what seemed to be spontaneous cardiac failure. Water hemlock might kill in a few hours with minimal trace. She planted these plants in the secret garden she created behind the main house, pretending to be a medical patch while combining legal plants to create a medicinal arsenal. Catherine refined the skill of manipulating emotions, interpreting men's innermost desires, and presenting herself as the solution to their isolation. She carefully examined her targets, modifying her demeanor to fulfill their wishes. She got deeply spiritual for the religion. Regarding the She became a well-read conversationalist after becoming an intellectual. She provided consolation to the bereaved and comprehension. Her greatest weapon and most terrifying quality was her capacity to transform into whatever a man required. Ability. Despite her youth, Elizabeth was essential to the operations. Achievement. Her sincere appearance of innocence served as the ideal pretext for the family's actions. Untrustworthy visitors discovered it. It was hard to stay tired around a girl who didn't appear to be able to lie. She was also the first warning system, her innately amiable personality, which enables her to learn about visitors' histories, financial circumstances, and travel schedules without causing suspicion. The practical aspects of disposal had been figured out by the Zimmer brothers with Germanic efficiency. Claus had found a sequence of naturally occurring caverns in the mountainside that are only reachable by a secret entrance behind a rockfall. Corpses could be transported there in the dark, shielded by loose stones, where the chemistry of the mountains would speed up breakdown. Personal belongings were arranged with care. Items that were valuable were saved, but that could be used to identify the victim were destroyed or buried apart. Ezra. Perhaps the most important role was played by Hawthorne. He had an impeccable reputation in the area, and his word held sway on local officials. Occasionally, inquiries into missing passengers were made, and Ezra would firmly attest that the person had, in fact, stayed at Millbrook Inn, but had. In good health and spirits, they left. His honest manner and aged features have always pleased even the most persistent questioner. Their second victim, a tobacco, arrived in the spring of 1833. William Fraser is a North Carolina merchant. Fraser was almost transporting $500 in silver coins, which were earned from the selling of crops during a prosperous season. He was 38-year-old bachelor who is renowned for his solitude and habit of creating. Traveling alone on business trips to avoid splitting profits with partners. On a soggy April evening, Fraser arrived. Captivated to the inn's coziness and warmth right away. Following weeks of grueling travel, the sisters executed their well-honed plan with accuracy. Margaret conversed with him about business, finding information about his financial status and preparations for trip. Sarah's dinners were so good that he didn't want to continue his travel. With her charming innocence and piano playing, Elizabeth delighted him, reminding him of the daughter he'd never had. However, Fraser's fate was sealed by Catherine. His third evening at. She discovered him reading by himself in the common area of the inn, with a leather-bound book of poetry open on his lap. Despite her lack of knowledge, she approached him shyly and asked if he might read aloud to her because she enjoyed the sound of lovely words. Fraser read to Catherine by lamplight for 2 hours. As she paid close attention, his voice became louder and more assured. After he was done, she put a gentle hand on his arm and told him that his voice was the most beautiful she had ever heard. Fraser's loneliness, which had encased his heart for decades, started to crumble. "I've never encountered someone like you," he said to her, his voice full of feelings he had repressed for years. "You restore my sense of life." "Then, don't depart tomorrow," Catherine answered, her eyes that perfectly calculatedly reflected the lamplight. "Await another day so I can hear you read once more." Fraser stayed an additional week, during which time Catherine progressively deepened their relationship when Sarah started adding tiny amounts of pokeweed extract to his nightly brew. The symptoms started out mildly, with little dizziness and stomach discomfort, but nothing frightening enough to raise concerns right away. Fraser blamed his poor mood on the strain of traveling and the emotional turmoil brought on by his sudden amorous sentiments. On the last evening at. Fraser was invited to join Catherine for a private meal in her suite at Millbrook Inn. Sarah had his favorite ready dinner and a bottle of wine that has been infused with a precise amount of water hemlock extract. Fraser was sitting opposite Catherine in the warm glow of the candle, talking to a woman he thought may help him with his concerns and dreams. Alter his life forever. He was unaware that he was near death. The poison did just what Sarah had expected it to. Fraser's passing seemed to be an unexpected heart attack caused on by exercise and excitement. The following morning, his body was found in Catherine's bed, seemingly resting quietly in his slumber following a night of enthusiasm. Even if a medical professional had been on hand to check the body, the symptoms were exactly the same as a middle-aged guy who had previously had a sedentary lifestyle has developed spontaneous heart failure. Fraser was interred beside suitable symbolism in the small graveyard of the inn, a last detail that Margaret had expanded their business. A genuine grave with a headstone that is sculpted provided the ideal hiding location while giving the impression of being treated with respect. Numerous generations of Cunningham family members were buried in the cemetery, therefore more burials inconspicuous to local observers. Fraser's wealth and priceless private. His wagon and horses were sold to itinerant traders, and his belongings vanished into the sisters' expanding wealth. Weeks later, they passed through. His disappearance was ascribed to his choice to relocate to Kentucky instead of rather than go back to North Carolina, a reasonable justification that nobody considered to probe too deeply. By 1833's end, the sisters had mastered a system that was almost imperceptible. They had mastered the art of deliberately spacing out their misdeeds, never aiming for more than 4 or 5 victims annually in order to prevent the development of patterns that could draw notice. They created cover tales for visitors who passed away at the inn, from heart attacks to mishaps to choices to make the place their permanent home. Above all, they came to fully trust one another, forming a conspiracy so tightly that not even the outer world was never given even the smallest inkling of what they were doing. When we believed we had witnessed everything, the terror at Millbrook gets more intense. Please share this video if this narrative is chilling you. With a dark mystery-loving pal. Please remember to subscribe and click the like button to show your support for our material. To never overlook tales such as this. Together, let's find out what occurs next. Since the Cunningham sisters were only beginning their careers from 1834 to 1845, the reputation that Millbrook established spread throughout the mid-Atlantic and beyond. It was mentioned by travelers in the same respectful manner as the best places in Baltimore or Richmond. The sisters had established a unique establishment, a secluded mountain lodge that offered opulent lodging and service that was on par with the finest hotels in cities. Margaret had increased the size of their lawful business. Notably, for visitors, the inn now kept a stable of fine horses, ran a tiny distillery that produced high-quality mountain whiskey and even provided hunting trips with guides by Hawthorne, Ezra. In addition to generating a sizable income, these lawful businesses allowed the sisters not just innkeepers but also as astute businesswomen. The Virginia State Archives' well-maintained guest record from this era chronicles their achievement. Richmond politicians, Charleston merchants, and land. Baltimore-based traders and intrepid travelers from as far afield as Boston inscribed their names in Margaret's exquisite ledger book. Many came back again and again, becoming frequent customers who told their co-workers how great Millbrook was. And companions. However, underneath this justifiable triumph was a meticulously planned murderous apparatus that worked with the accuracy of a clockwork machine. The sisters had perfected the art of choosing victims. Catherine acquired the nearly superhuman ability to recognize the folks who would always be remembered. The outcasts, the loners, those who avoided intimate connections because they had secrets. Sarah's understanding of toxins had grown to comprise dozens of poisons found in plants and minerals, each having unique symptoms and profiles of detection. Elizabeth was skilled at extracting specific personal guest information through seemingly harmless conversation, while Margaret oversaw the entire process with the accuracy of a military action. They reported roughly 43 victims throughout these years, the precise number that the railway surveyor later discovered. Every death was meticulously prepared and carried out in compliance with stringent procedures that increased revenue while lowering risk. The sisters grew up. Thorough descriptions of their targets, occasionally spending weeks monitoring possible victims before making their final choice. Take the example of Jonathan Waverly, a Pennsylvania land surveyor who came in September 1838. Waverly was employed by the state government to do mapping work, which required him to spend months at a time traveling alone through isolated regions. He carried a significant amount of money for surveying equipment, remuneration for his labor, and money to buy tracts of land that he had seen as potential investments. Margaret recognized Waverly right away as the perfect target. He had to spend a lot of time away from civilization for his work, implying that months may pass before his disappearance is recognized. His surveying work served as the ideal cover narrative. While working alone in hazardous conditions, he could have easily been harmed by a variety of natural risks. Territory. Most significantly, because of his somewhat antisocial nature, he had little close pals who would look into it if he didn't come back. The sisters launched their campaign right away. Waverley watched a game, and Sarah made special meals with it. Ezra Hunt, establishing a link between the untamed mountain and the food. He was drawn to the setting. Elizabeth conversed with him over his mapping efforts, saying interest with his technical expertise and giving him a sense of appreciation for it. Margaret talked about possibilities. Land investments with him, establishing herself as an authority in the area who could point out lucrative prospects for him. However, Waverley's fate was sealed by the ingredient that Catherine supplied. She didn't approach him as a possible romantic victory, but as a relative who appreciated the outdoors as much as he did. She disclosed an apparently vast understanding of mountain wildlife and plants acquired over years of meticulous research that genuinely aided her poisoning investigations. She went with him on a brief reconnaissance excursions in the grounds of the inn, exhibiting a level of familiarity with nature that Waverley discovered unstoppable. Waverley, I've never encountered a woman who has the same understanding of the mountains as you do. Finally broke his professional restraint and informed her during one of their outings. Most individuals only see wilderness. But underneath, you can see the order and beauty. Catherine answered, I've lived here my entire life, stepping. They stood on a ridge with a view of the valley, closer to him. I've learned things from the mountains that I never learnt from books. Matters pertaining to death, life, and the harmony between them. Waverley stayed for 3 weeks instead of the 2 days he had originally planned, supposedly to carry out more comprehensive surveying work in the region, but in reality, because he had come under Catherine's spell. Sarah progressively added stronger poisons to his diet throughout this period, causing symptoms that resembled the initial phases of mountain fever, a real danger that had claimed the recent lives of a number of surveyors. Sarah's poisoning of Waverley was something she came up with on her own. A substance extracted from the destruction of angel mushrooms that caused liver failure over a number months. Days. The signs and symptoms were exactly the same as those of mountain fever, and even a skilled physician would have been unlikely to be able to tell the two scenarios apart. Waverley seems to have died a horrible but completely expected death. Work-related risk. A Kentucky merchant purchased his surveying equipment, and his intricate charts became a component of Margaret's expanding knowledge base regarding the resources and geography of the area. His body merged the others inside the closed mountain caverns, and his name was recorded locally as an additional victim of the perilous way of life on the frontier. The sisters' operation was brilliant not only because of the way they killed, but their capacity to preserve the appearance of respectability. They went to local church services. Settlement of Millbrook, made philanthropic contributions to neighborhood causes, and kept up relationships with local families. Sarah offered medical support, and Margaret was a member of the Regional Merchants Association's board. To nearby farms in times of discomfort. Sunday school was taught by Catherine. Elizabeth planned social gatherings that united remote mountain communities and gave to local kids. This community service accomplished several goals. It gave them access to character witnesses and alibis for situations in which inquiries concerning absent visitors may be made. It provided them with access to details on visitors coming through the area. Above all, it made them the cornerstones of the local authorities would never dispute the community's word. Additionally, the sisters created a comprehensive network of commercial contacts that contributed to the legitimacy of their increasing fortune. They made investments in land acquisitions around the area, progressively building up a portfolio of real estate that increased in value and produced rental income. They gave local farmers and business owners loans, making interest payments as well as communal impact. They even bought stock in a number of riverboat companies. Businesses on the Ohio River, expanding their revenue streams and diversifying their assets. The Cunningham sisters were among Western Virginia's wealthiest landowners by 1845. Their tale of success was cited as proof of what ambitious women could do despite the harsh conditions of the frontier. Occasionally, tales about the ambitious Cunningham sisters appeared in local publications. They had constructed a prospering company empire from the mountain estate they inherited. However, behind this facade of genuine achievement, there was the meticulously hidden remains of almost 40 men who had made the deadly error of taking the sisters' hospitality. Every death had increased their fortune and improved their strategies, establishing an unstoppable and undetectable loop of profit and murder. The seclusion that had first shielded them from detection and now offered something even more worthwhile. Ideal setting for their predatory behavior. Millbrook was now a spider's web, enticing and lovely on the outside yet lethal to anybody who got caught up in its threads. It was neither police enforcement or suspicion that signaled the end. Family members, but from a surprising source, one of their own workers. The younger of the two German brothers, Heinrich Zimmer, had been becoming more and more erratic following a hunting injury in the autumn of 1849 that caused him to become dependent and suffer from severe pain. For relief on Lordum. Of the Zimmer brothers, Heinrich had always been the more sensitive one, and the years of involvement. His brother Klaus either disregarded or neglected the psychological toll that the sisters' crimes had taken. Acknowledge. Sarah first administered the Lordum to treat real discomfort. Heinrich's escape from the guilt and nightmares that disturbed his sleep had gradually turned into relief. However, addiction brought with it its own set of issues, mood swings, paranoia, and a propensity for loose language. It placed him a greater risk to the operation. On a chilly February morning in 1850, the crisis started when Heinrich showed up at the main house's kitchen entrance, his clothes and eyes crazed with drug-induced terror. Unkempt from a restless night, Sarah was cooking breakfast by herself in the kitchen for a passing trader from. The sisters had already determined that North Carolina, a man who had arrived the night before, would be their next target. Heinrich muttered, his voice trembling with emotion, "I can't do it anymore. Every night I saw their faces. They're all standing there, watching me every time I close my eyes. 43 men, Sarah. 43 souls demanding justice." Sarah remained calm, but her thoughts were racing as she assessed the danger Heinrich now posed. His expertise of their offenses was thorough and specific. He could give authorities precise burial site locations, testimony that would condemn all 4 sisters to the gallows, along with details of murder techniques. "You're not well, Heinrich," she remarked softly as she approached him, seemingly worried. "Your thinking is being affected by the laudanum. You're seeing unreal things." "No," Heinrich said, his voice rising perilously. Sarah looked up at the ceiling, praying that the visitor upstairs hadn't been roused. "I am aware of our actions. I am aware of what you forced me to do. And I am aware that it must put an end to it." The discussion went on for about an hour, with Heinrich taking turns between irate accusations and heartfelt confessions as Sarah attempted to soothe, without warning the others in the house. Eventually, she was able to persuade him to go back to his cabin with a pledge that after he had had time to recover and collect his thoughts, they would talk about the matter. However, Sarah was aware there wouldn't be any more conversation. Everything they had created was a danger because Heinrich Zimmer had turned into a liability, and obligations needed to be removed. That night, following their visitors, as they went to bed, Sarah made the Zimmer boys a special dinner as a thank you for their years of faithful service, she told Klaus. The dish included Heinrich's Favorite foods in addition to Sarah's unique spiced wine, which had enough potent foxglove extract to, within hours, stop a man's heart. That night, Heinrich passed away peacefully while sleeping. The same thing was blamed for his death. Heart ailment that had reportedly taken the lives of a number of its visitors throughout the years. Klaus, who had eaten fewer. Because of his innate temperance, he survived the poisoned wine, but with severe heart damage that rendered him feeble and reliant on SARS medical take care. Their immediate issue was resolved by Heinrich's passing, but new difficulties. Despite his physical frailty, Klaus started to probe directly about his brother's unexpected death. The parallels between the symptoms that Heinrich had and those that some of their. He was aware of the visitors, and his devotion to the sisters was waning. Under the burden of sadness and distrust, Margaret realized that a crucial stage was approaching in their operation. The system of cooperation and trust that had shielded them for almost 20 years was starting to break down, and any extensive research would reveal evidence that even their great power could not bury. She started preparing for the likelihood that they could have to leave Millbrook Inner. The last visitor. Samuel Hartwell was a Savannah cotton merchant who passed away at Millbrook Inn. Who brought over $1,000 in gold coins and banknotes when they landed in March 1851. In his 50s, Hartwell was a widower who traveled north to Pennsylvania to negotiate contracts with textile factories. After several days of extraordinary generosity, the sisters' death followed the predictable pattern of apparent heart failure. That involved close friendship with Catherine. However, Hartwell's passing signaled a significant shift in the sisters' approach. They committed a big error for the first time in almost 2 decades. Hartwell had scheduled a meeting with a business partner in Pittsburgh on a particular day, and when he didn't show up, his colleagues started making investigations that ultimately made their way to Virginia's local authorities. Millbrook County Sheriff Thomas Brennan was a competent. The Cunningham sisters' operation was unlike anything he had ever seen in his more than 2 decades as a law enforcement officer. His first inquiry was standard. A few inquiries to make sure Hartwell had, in fact, remained at the inn and left undamaged. Ezra and Margaret gave their customary testimony, backed up by meticulously kept visitor records that revealed Hartwell's departure time and final destination. However, compared to earlier researchers, Brennan was more persistent, and his research started revealing minor contradictions in the sisters' account. In the following county, a blacksmith recalled shoeing a horse that fit Hartwell's mount's description. However, a few days following the businessman's, a merchant who was thought to have traveled through the region remembered buying supplies from a person who looked Hartwell, but once more, the departure date from Millbrook Inn was not coincidental. These differences were modest and may have been accounted for by a variety of unrelated circumstances, but they were sufficient to sow doubts in Brennan's thoughts. He started investigating other cases of missing individuals involving tourists who had last been observed in the vicinity of Millbrook Inn, and the pattern that surfaced was extremely concerning. Sheriff Brennan's. Once he started looking into the larger pattern of disappearances surrounding Millbrook Inn, the investigation quickly picked up speed. According to the county data he examined, during the previous 20 years, at least 15. Several cases of missing persons have concerned tourists who were last known to be lodging at the Cunningham property. Although specific instances could be clarified by the different. The statistical grouping was unavoidable given the risks associated with frontier travel. Brennan took care to avoid raising any alarms. The sisters to his research, carrying out his questions in confidence, and staying away from direct communication with anybody. Affixed to the hotel. His chat with Klaus Zimmer during one of the infrequent German immigrant excursions to the store to buy supplies. Still mourning the loss of his brother, Klaus and showed signs of being more talkative than normal and being more suspicious of the circumstances surrounding it. My sibling, Heinrich. Before he passed away, he was distressed. Klaus informed Brennan in what seemed to be a friendly exchange outside the general store. He talked about things that woke him up at night. The sheriff, there are a lot of secrets in mountains, and not all of them should remain hidden. For a less seasoned detective, this enigmatic comment might have meant nothing, but Brennan understood the indications that a man is having trouble handling risky information. He set up a private rendezvous with Klaus in a distant place. It was at Millbrook that the whole truth started to come to light. Klaus's admission was slow and unfinished. As he shared tidbits of what he knew, years of devotion and dread fought against remorse and suspicion. He couldn't bring himself to accuse the sisters of murder outright, but he gave enough information about the enigmatic. His brother's increasing anxiety, mysterious burials, and late-night activities to provide Brennan with the proof he required in order to acquire search warrants. The Millbrook raid was carried out early on April 15, 1851, with 8 armed deputies encircling the property to keep people from escaping. Brennan and federal marshals had worked together to guarantee the appropriate handling of any evidence discovered. Understanding that there may be cross-state offenses in this instance. The sisters displayed their usual poise when the police arrived. Brennan was met by Margaret at the front door with courteous concern, hoping to help with whatever the investigation had revealed him to their land. Catherine was truly troubled by the idea that something inappropriate might have taken place at their esteemed organization. Sarah volunteered to make the policeman some refreshments, but the charges being made against her family appeared to be perplexing and frightening to Elizabeth. However, they practiced performances were unable to hide the tangible evidence left by 2 decades of murder. The pursuit of several belongings that obviously belonged to missing travelers were found in the main residence. An eye-catching silver pocket watch with Samuel Hartwell's initials engraved on it, and a leather portfolio with Thomas's business records. Kellerman, as well as an assortment of private correspondence and images that symbolized dozens of distinct victims. Additional. Sarah's well-tended deadly plant garden, which featured multiple species that had no valid medical uses. Her library of chemical and botany literature demonstrated her proficiency in toxicity that far above the level of expertise needed for common home cures. Tucked up in her personal space, investigators discovered documents and thorough notes outlining the effects and quantities of different plant poisons that unmistakably matched the deaths of particular visitors. The identification of the last piece of evidence required to validate the extent of the sisters' crimes was burial caves. Klaus, facing charges as a murder accessory, brought detectives to the hidden entry behind the cliff. As the railway surveyor would discover them months later, inside the caverns. Afterwards, 43 men's skeletal remains and personal belongings valued at tens of thousands. A story of terrible death was recounted by each skeleton. The several skulls had puncture holes discovered at the base, suggesting that some victims had been swiftly slain with sharp objects, probably while intoxicated or poisoned and unconscious. Others displayed symptoms of suffocation or strangling. Some seemed to have passed away from toxin alone, with their bones displaying the chemical alterations linked to the toxicity of heavy metals. The trial of one of the most dramatic court cases in Virginia history included the Cunningham sisters. Newspapers everywhere. The case was covered nationwide. The narrative of 4 ladies who had run one of the most prosperous criminal activities in the history of the United States. Daniel Hutchinson, an attorney for the Commonwealth, led the prosecution. Provided convincing proof of a plot that had killed over 40 people over the course of almost 20 years. Throughout the hearings, Margaret insisted that she was innocent and that any evidence discovered at the inn had been planted by adversaries aiming to ruin the reputation of their family. Catherine lost it all during her testimony, which alternated between heartfelt admissions and denials, implicating all four sisters in the killings. Sarah remained silent, exhibiting a stoic demeanor that many seen as a confession of guilt. The youngest and most empathetic defendant, Elizabeth, stated that she been forced by her elder sisters and pleaded with the court for leniency. The defense plan was centered on the for orphaned women's sensitivity and loneliness as they attempt to survive in a hazardous frontier setting. The lawyer for the sister, Marcus Fairfield, said that uncontrollable circumstances had forced them to take drastic steps, and that when determining their sentence, characteristics like as gender and youth should be taken into account. However, the overwhelming data and it was difficult to maintain any sympathy given the startling extent of their misdeeds. The jury. Less than 3 hours of deliberation before finding all four defendants guilty on several counts of first-degree murder. The sentence was final and fast. On October 12, 1851, Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were set to be executed by hanging. Elizabeth, in great part because of her age when the atrocities started and her seeming collaboration with the police, was given a life sentence without potential for parole. On a gloomy October morning, the killings proceeded according to plan, with hundreds of onlookers assembling to see the story of the Cunningham sisters come to a close. Margaret had the same attitude as she died. She displayed the same icy poise that she had displayed during the trial, with no last words of regret or justification. As the nooses were fastened around their necks, Catherine and Sarah stood hand in hand on the scaffold, their last instance of fraternal unity, in sharp contrast to the premeditated brutality their victims had seen what they had. After that, Elizabeth Cunningham was taken to Richmond's Virginia State Penitentiary, where she would live out the next 37 years. Prison logs show that she remained innocent till her passing in 1888. Asserting time and again that she had not voluntarily participated in her sister's deception but had instead been a victim of their offenses. At Millbrook Inn, she never had guests and left no written record of her stay. Klaus. After being given amnesty in return for his testimony, Zimmer vanished soon after the trial was over. A few reports were filed. He was never formally found again, however some people found him in Missouri and others in Ohio. He seemed to be totally broken by the agony of his brother's death and his part in revealing the sisters' wrongdoing, preventing him from settling down or establishing long-term relationships. Charges of accessory to murder were brought against Ezra Hawthorne, but his advanced. He received a reduced sentence of 10 years in prison because of his age and his cooperation with the police. He passed away while being held in 1854, allegedly continuing to insist that he had never guessed the actual knew the sisters' actions and had accepted their justifications for the numerous disappearances and killings. In order to pay off court orders against the Cunningham estate, Millbrook in itself was put up for auction. The recent proprietors, a Richmond-based Fletcher family, tried to keep it running as a respectable inn, but the property's its infamous reputation prevented it from drawing visitors. The structure stood abandoned for a number of years until being acquired by a mining corporation, who destroyed the buildings and transformed the land for industrial use. The remains of the victim were found in a copper mine that was permanently shut by court order, with a plain stone monument placed in honor of the 43 men who passed away at the Millbrook Inn. The marker that remains in place today, as per. Only the inscription is shown by local historical societies. Unknown lies here. Travelers between 1832 and 1851. May their passing bring them the serenity that was deprived of them in life. The case had significant ramifications for hotel regulations in Virginia and states that are adjacent. New legislation was passed mandating more thorough guest registration processes, notifying local authorities of visitor fatalities and conducting routine inspections of establishments that cater to tourists. The so-called Cunningham statutes persisted long into the 20th century. Possibly most importantly, in this instance, Millbrook turned into a warning about the perils of loneliness and the opportunity for evil to thrive in. Distant from the supervision of civilized people, criminal detectives started focusing more intently on trends of disappearances near isolated locations, which resulted in the identification of other smaller-scale activities that might have gone unnoticed otherwise. The results of the financial analysis showed the actual extent of the sisters' achievement. Their property, which includes their land holdings, liquid assets and company investments, were worth more than $50,000. A great deal of money for the time. Victims were compensated with the funds. Families wherever feasible, as well as to finance enhancements to law enforcement's capacity in isolated regions of Virginia. Numerous elements are noted by contemporary criminologists who have examined the case that played a part in the sisters' extraordinary achievement. They used a combination of meticulous victim selection. Compared to ghost stories, court documents and current accounts are both more commonplace and more horrifying. The tangible. Long into the 20th century, the location of Millbrook Inn served as a source of local superstition. Unusual artifacts were discovered in the area by hikers and hunters. Items of clothes, rusted metal, and old buttons that may have once belonged to the sisters' victims. Superior disposal skills, sophisticated death tactics, and, above all, a flawless cover tale that made their crimes almost imperceptible to modern detectives. The remoteness of their location offered privacy for their operations, yet a constant flow of possible victims was brought about by their reputation for hospitality. According to psychological profiles created by contemporary specialists, Margaret was the main mastermind behind the operation. Having the organizational abilities and antisocial personality qualities required to organize and carry out such a intricate criminal scheme. It's possible that Catherine experienced what is today known as borderline personality disorder. Disorder, which enables her to develop strong but ultimately pointless emotional bonds with victims. Sarah's proficiency with poisons points to a somewhat sadistic fixation with control and death. Elizabeth's role is still the most unclear. It may never be known whether she was a compelled accomplice or a consenting participant. Conclusively established. Why the situation of Millbrook Inn is so terrifying is the ease with which it could have gone on forever. If Heinrich Zimmer hadn't experienced his mental collapse, or the sisters might have carried on with their operations for longer if Sheriff Brennan had not been so tenacious in his investigation. Several more decades. Their eventual discovery's randomness serves as a reminder that it's possible that past atrocities went entirely unnoticed. Their criminals stealing their information to graves without markings. The Cunningham sisters' tale also underlines how vulnerable tourists are in the before the Industrial Revolution. When transportation was hazardous and communication was sluggish, a man may vanish between two towns and, if at all, not be missed for months. The sisters mercilessly took advantage of this weakness, transforming the hotel sector into a tool to combat loneliness and isolated. In Western Virginia, local tradition has kept skewed accounts of the Millbrook alive for many generations. In certain stories, the sisters were shown as unfortunate individuals who were compelled to take drastic actions due to their lack of resources and seclusion. Others made them into mystical beings that attracted victims by magic than of straightforward manipulation. The reality, as disclosed by whether these findings were real artifacts or just the result of irrational speculation fueled by The infamous past of the place is still unclear. Numerous attempts were made throughout the years in order to find more graveyards that may hold victims who were disposed of in other ways. In the 1980s, ground-penetrating radar scans found a number of soil anomalies that were in line with unmarked graves, although further excavation was not possible due to ethical and legal concerns. There is still a chance that only a percentage of the sisters' victims are represented by the 43 discovered in the mine. Total number of kills. The Virginia State Library's Cunningham case file. Researchers and amateur historians are still drawn to archives because they are captivated by one of America's finest effective operations involving serial killings. Margaret Cunningham's meticulous documentation, along with Sarah's. The physical evidence and botanical notes found on the property paint an exceptionally comprehensive picture of how, in the 19th century, such atrocities were organized and carried out. This enigma demonstrates the ease with which evil can conceal themselves under an air of respectability and how seclusion might offer the ideal cover for the most horrible offenses. The Cunningham sisters' narrative reminds us that monsters aren't always what they seem. They can appear as endearing hostesses at times. Provide tired travelers with the necessities. What are your thoughts? This tale? Do you think that all was made public, or are there still mysteries hidden in those Virginia's mountains? Tell me what you believe actually occurred at Millbrook Inn in the comments section below. If you found this enjoyable narrative, click the notification button, and subscribe if you want more scary stories like this one. Ring the bell and tell a mystery-loving person about it. There are many sinister secrets in the past just waiting to be discovered, and I'll be available to assist you in finding them. We'll look at another tale from America's history in the upcoming video. Concealed Terror History.